and we're going to be continuing in the Mark of the Beast, Volume 1, and we left off on page 145. And if you kind of remember what we were wrapping up with class last week, we're identifying, the identification of the of this second beast, of this second Babylon, and of course that was going through the identification with the different things, but with New York City. And within New York City, remember, there's actually, or within that, I think it's on the island of Long Island. There's actually a township on there called Babylon. The name of the city, the name of this township is Babylon. And you can see there's different prophecies that were covered, talking about a light of a candle no longer showing within that city. And remember, that's speaking of the light that was shining on the Statue of Liberty. And remember what the Statue of Liberty represented. It represented the bringing in, it represented the welcoming of the immigrants. Well, with the change in the tide and the change in the thinking at this time, that light, that welcoming light, is no longer shining because the immigrants are no longer welcome. They don't want. You can see the legislation. You can see the opposition to allowing the people to actually enter the United States. And then it talks about, it talked a little bit about the sorcery, about the music of harpers, the music of harpers. And if you think about the things that go on in New York City, it's a huge entertainment area. You have a whole lot of Broadway shows, musicals, and things like that, and a lot of your recording artists and things like that do have dealings with New York City. So you have a lot of that stuff that takes place there. Commerce, the head of commerce actually being in there. And you also see about sorceries. I talked about sorceries. And remember, that has to do with pharmaceuticals. It has to do with the pharmaceutical industry. And the medication and things that the doctors put forth to actually hide symptoms. And remember, that's what these medications do. The medications actually hide the symptoms. They don't do anything to cure. They can't. And that was one thing Pastor really he really talked about. About the doctors of the world. He said, sadly, most doctors only treat symptoms and are never able to find the cause, giving false hope to the critical ill, and that's what they do. Without realizing it, the doctors they don't have life. They can't save lives, because the people are practicing the ways that bring forth death. The only true way to have life, or to have your life saved, is through the rejection of sin and through the complete submission, coming in unity with Yahweh and Yahweh's laws. That is the only way that you're ever going to have, that mankind will ever have eternal life, salvation, however you want to refer to it. And then, closing out a class last week, were talking about the numbering system, about how the numbering system that was instituted in Babylon, that the numbering system actually, on page 143, talks about the number of a man. And remember, Yahweh's number is 13, and remember what the number 13 represents. The number 13 represents Yahweh's righteous attributes, his 13 perfect righteous attributes. But he shows that a man's number is 6, and then he went through the Gematria, I think that's how you pronounce that. But he took through several things, and how, when you add up the letters that make up the word mark, or the words mark of beast, you come up with 666. When you add up the words for New York, which identifies this second Babylon, you see again the number 666. And this is what Pastor was saying. He showed it's not only possible to identify Nimrod, the man, through this number, but it's also this second Babylon, New York. In the religions today, you see this beast that is in control today has these two horns. It's a religion. It has two horns. Remember, those two horns are represented are the Catholics and the Protestants, and they teach licentiousness as I think it's in the book of Yada. and where it talks about that where they have taken the undeserved pardon of Yahshua, and they've turned it into licentiousness. And that word licentious, as Pastor showed, means a license to sin. And of course, and what that boils down to is, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to have any consequences for your actions. And this is what's being taught in the churches. You can do whatever you want to, you're going to be saved, you're going to be forgiven. So what is that showing? They're showing there's no consequences for making bad choices. Yeah, and we know that that's absolutely that is that's foolishness. Everything that we do, every choice that we make, either has rewards or consequences, just like the peaceful solution teaches us. And then on the top of page 145 here, it talks about, Pastor shows here about these two horns in the last days, as Scripture shows, will turn against and persecute those who obey the laws of Yahweh. And this persecution has always, it's always been there, but the prophecies show it's actually going to take a turn for the worse, and the persecution is going to continue to grow. It's going to get worse and worse as we get closer and closer to the end. And he shows that this persecution is being restrained by Yahweh at this time, as it's shown there in 2 Thessalonians 2:7. And let me see here. And he shows that this power is being restrained until the set number of servants of Yahweh has been fulfilled, or as Revelation shows, that the number that the sealing of the saints, that whole number has been sealed. That's how long the protection is going to be. The protection is going to be there, and then once that number has been sealed, then the winds of war are going to be released. They're going to be loosed. And again, we see that there in Revelation chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. But the blood of the prophets in Revelation 18:24, it says, "And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all that were slain upon the earth." Now, Pastor, he writes here and he clarifies these things, and he says this is not to say that all the saints that have been killed were killed in that city. But what he's saying is, he says, John or Yachanan is saying that this same Babylonian system is responsible for the killing of all the believers that have been killed. It was that way from the beginning. Remember, all the way back in Genesis chapter 3 and chapter 4. When Cain rose up, that system that Cain instituted, when that system rose up and killed Abel. It wasn't necessarily Cain himself, but it was that system that Cain represented. He says they were killed for the simple reason that they did not accept the Babylonian way, but they followed Yahweh's laws. And we've seen, and as we've shown in chapter 5, Nimrod's way of converting others was through terror and tyranny. Killing in the name of religion was the norm. That was the deal behind the Inquisitions, as Pastor shows here. The Inquisitions, the Crusades in the same way. Remember, Constantine went forth, and they always went forth in the name of religion with a sword in one hand, saying, recant of your ways, don't follow these ways, you need to convert to this way or else you will die. And that's not Yahweh's way. Yahweh's way has always been a way through education. And this is what he says when he says, come and let us reason together. You see that reasoning continuing to take place in the work that's being done by this house in these last days. Through the work of our pastor and overseer, he reasons. He goes through and he reasons and he points these things out to the world. And he's showing, look, this is what your way is bringing. This is what it's brought for 6,000 years. Just look at the hell that is being brought forth. The sickness and the disease and the war and the violence. Just look at the violence that has shown up, just within the past week. It's not getting better, it's getting worse, and it's going to continue to get worse. And, Yahshua pointed out, and so did Daniel, that there's going to be a time of trouble such as never has come to pass since the beginning of time, and there's never going to be a time that's going to come to pass since then, after this. So, this is going to be worse than anything anybody can ever imagine, worse than anything that anybody has ever been through. But we don't have to fear. Yahweh tells us, do not fear. He tells the two witnesses, he told the witnesses, do not fear nor be afraid. Am I not Yahweh? Is Yahweh not in complete control? Go back to what Yeshua went through in the book of Job, chapter 1 and chapter 2. And that proves right there that Satan can do no more than what Yahweh allows. Satan cannot do anything unless Yahweh allows it. So if we're allowed to go through something, it's for our benefit and for our learning or for the learning of others. So that, to help build our strength, to help build our faith and our trust in Yahweh. And this is all we need to do. We just have to put our full faith and full trust in that. And this is the way this is going to come about, and the way it's always come about, that these killing in the form, the Great Inquisitions and the Crusades, they came about through the passing of many laws, right? Remember the laws that were brought forth. Daniel chapter 7. Look at Daniel here. Pop this down here. Daniel chapter 7 in verse 25 there. Look at that. Pastor's brought this out many times. In many publications he's brought this out. And he says, and he will speak, talking about this little horn, will speak great words and will wear out, mentally attack, to cause to fall away the saints of Yahweh. And Pastor has shown that those great words that are passed are these many laws that are passed that will make anyone a criminal. Anyone in the United States right now can be convicted under any numerous number of laws, even without realizing it. Anybody's a criminal. Anybody can be a so-called criminal. But the powers that be, they're going to, they are going to continue, and this is how they're going to get the legal system in there. This is how it was done in the past. This is how it was done in the past. If you take a look in Acts, if you look in Acts, chapter 22. Now this is talking about Shaul here, and remember, Shaul, he was a Roman. He was actually a part of this beastly system, and part of his job with the beastly system, what he did is he persecuted the believers, right? And this is what he shows here in Acts 22, verse 3. Here it says, I am truly a Yahweh, a man born of Tarsus of Cilicia, yet brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, and was taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward Yahweh, as you all are this day. But it wasn't the laws of Yahweh he was brought up in. What was he brought up in? The traditions, the laws of the land. That's what he was brought up in. And I persecuted this way to the death. So he persecuted and he taught against and persecuted. He taught against and persecuted the believers. And I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering both men and women into prison. And the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify to this. And the high priest, because that's who he went to get his permission. To the high priest. The high priest was also a judge, right? Okay? And I also received letters from them to the brothers in Damascus, where I also went to bring those who were there in chains to Jerusalem to be punished. And those letters, it's the same system, man. It's the same system that's in place today. When somebody goes to be arrested, the way the legal system works in the United States is that whenever an accusation is brought, the prosecutor, and we'll get into that here in a second, but the prosecutor actually will go to a judge and say, okay, judge, I've got this accusation, this against this man. I need him brought to court. And so the judge looks at it and says, okay, I'm going to write this piece of paper out. I'm writing this letter, which is called an arrest warrant, giving you permission to go and bodily take this person into custody and bring him in to make him stand trial. It's the same system. It's no different. There's nothing new under the sun. It's the same, it's the same. It's the same system. The same system that we see. But the scriptures show another killing of the believers that will take place before Yahshua returns. And you've got to remember, as this shows here, as we're getting into, the house of Yahweh is not loved by the world, right? Are we loved by the world? Do the Catholics love us? Does the Pope love us? I don't think so. I don't think any of the major universities here in Abilene love us either. And it's because the lies and the truth are exposed. They're exposed for who they are. And anytime that takes place, the person being exposed, they have that hatred that builds up within them. And they have that bitterness and that hatred, and they want to seek, it's not justice, as they try to call it, but it's revenge. It's revenge that they seek against the one that is pointing out and exposing their sins. And this is why Cain was angry. Why are you angry? Why are you downcast? If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? Right? What was Abel? What was the priest telling Cain? Cain, if you had quit your sinning, you wouldn't be having all of these things come upon you. So that's why Cain was angry, because his sins were pointed out. And Cain's solution, was not to repent, not to stop doing what he was doing, but to kill the messenger. And this is the same tactic that has been used throughout the history of mankind, and it's the same tactic that's being used today. But you can see here in Revelation 6, 9 through 11, and when he had opened the fifth seal, and under this I saw the souls of them that were slain for the word of Yahweh and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Yahweh, holy and true, will you not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And white robes were given to every one of them, and they said unto them that they should rest for a little season, until the full number of their fellow servants, also their brethren, and also their brethren should be killed as they were, should be completed. Now this killing that's going forth, now remember this does talk about an actual killing, physically taking somebody's life. But it can also mean having that desire to put somebody to death. That desire, talking about somebody, because murder can be done through words, right? Through gossip, through slander, through false accusations, through all of those things, people can be murdered. Their reputation, their character, character assassination, that can all be carried out. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical taking of the life, but it can be just as much their character. It says, notice the last verse. These believers that were killed earlier for their beliefs must wait until their spiritual brothers are killed before they are avenged by Yahweh, but it's before this judgment comes to pass. It's before this judgment, because Yahweh is not vengeful. The wicked are going to have their reward. And so are the righteous. The righteous are also going to have the reward. And it says, compare Revelation 6:11 with Revelation 13:15. And that shows here, and he had power to give life. And he had power to give life to the likeness of the beast, and the beast should both speak and cause as many that would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. And this is going to be all of those, war is going to be waged against those who refuse to take on this mark. These believers are killed because they will refuse to accept the mark of the beast. And yes, that is taking place. You see it in the wars in the Middle East, in the wars where people are refusing to convert to this Western way. You can see the wars that are waged against them. Now, Daniel saw this. Daniel saw the killing of the saints. And Daniel 7:21-22, and it says, And I beheld the same horn made war with them and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days and the judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So Daniel saw that this same war that the prophets of old, that all the prophets had been through, that he knew that the apostles and Yahshua were going to go through, this same thing is going to continue all the way until Yahshua returns. He says, we see from, Pastor shows, he says, we see from Revelation 13:15 and the previous scriptures that in Daniel, that this beastly system will make war against the saints, and that war will continue until Yahshua comes the second time to stop it. Yahshua will then be King of kings and ruler of rulers. Our Savior Yahshua told us of this same event when his disciples asked him what would take place in the end of the age. And in Matthew 24 here, it shows, and then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and they will kill you, and you shall be hated above all people for my name's sake. And Pastor shows here, he says, please make note here that the true followers of Yahweh will not be loved as the churches are today, but they will actually be hated. Is there hatred against the major religions of the world today? No. But you do see the bitterness and you do see the hatred that comes forth concerning Yahweh and anyone who would stand for any form of righteousness. But we see here it says, and after this last killing of the believers, and only after it will Yahweh's judgment be on this Babylonian system. And it says here in Revelation 19, we'll go 1 through 2 here. It says, after these things I heard a great voice of much people in heaven saying, Hallelujah, hallelujah, Yahweh, salvation and glory and honor and power to Yahweh our Father. For true and righteous are his judgments, for he has judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication. And he says here, and it shows here, and he had avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. This is, again, the judgment that comes against this great whore for the things that she has been doing. And Revelation 9:4, it shows, and it was commanded them they should not hurt the earth, the grass of the earth, neither on any green thing or any tree, but only of those which do not have the seal of Yahweh in their foreheads. So, you see this judgment, and this is going to come through, as we're going to see here, and it's going to come through a legal system. And remember, Pastor talked about, he says, and this is something else that he talked about. Remember, when he talked about being arrested, he says, what are you going to do when they come and arrest me? Many years later, that came to pass. Didn't he say something? Didn't he make the statement several years ago, something along the lines of, what are you going to do when they take me to Rome? To the court in Rome, the world court? He made that comment many years ago. So we know that this is also going to come to pass. But it's going to come, it's going to come to pass, through these, when you look at this persecution that takes place. This persecution. And we'll take a look here. I'm going to show you what that word persecute means. Pop this over here a little bit. I'll show you the system. The system here, and it shows here this definition of persecute means to harass or punish in a manner designed to injure, grieve, or afflict, specifically to cause to suffer because of a belief. Okay, and that's what persecution is. To annoy with persistent or urgent approaches. To continue to come after a person, repeatedly over and over and over, to harass somebody, to annoy with these persistent or urgent approaches. That is another way that this persecution can take place. Now, in Acts 24, it kind of shows you here, this is when after Shaul was arrested, Shaul had an arrest warrant put out for him, and he was arrested, and he was taken to court, and it shows there, and after 5 days, Kenaniah the high priest came down with the elders and with a certain orator named Terullius, who presented evidence to the governor against Shaul. This is the same system, the same prosecutorial system that's in the world today. This orator that is shown here, this Terullius, takes the same, it's the same position as a prosecuting attorney is today. A district attorney, a county attorney, is charged with, their duty is to their job is to bring these accusations. And they bring this argument before the judge. And in the court system, who speaks first? Prosecutor. The prosecutor goes before the judge and he lays out, okay, Your Honor, this is what they're accused of. He's accused of this, 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 and this, and we're going to prove this, and we're going to bring this to your attention, and we're going to bring forth witnesses, Well, witnesses that were brought forth as we saw, and I don't know if I went back that far, but these witnesses that were gathered against Shaul, or might have been against Stephen, and it's probably against both of them, but it was recorded one or the other. I don't remember which. But false witnesses. They gathered false witnesses, and they had to go through so many witnesses before they could actually get two liars to agree. And then they could actually take those two liars. They picked and they chose who they would take to act as these witnesses and to testify in this court here. But you see, this certain orator named Tertullius who presented evidence to the governor against Shaul. And when he was called forward, Tertullius began his accusation. So you had the prosecution went first. Then, down in verse 10, you see the second part here. Now you see what took place here with the defense. Then Shaul, after the governor had motioned for him to speak, answered, "Since I know that you've been a judge to this nation for many years, I do more confidently answer for myself. But I confess to you this day that after the way which they call heresy, so I worship the Father of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets." So what's that showing you right there that he was on trial for? For violating their traditions, for whatever laws that were brought up, whatever laws that were created to make him a criminal, because he had done nothing against the law of the land and had done nothing against the laws of Yahweh. And he shows that. And he shows that up in, let me see. Let me see. I didn't know if it was up in verse 12 or not. But he shows, "I confess to you that I'm here because after the which they call heresy, so I worship the Father, of which are believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets." And a heretic, look what Webster's calls a heretic. A dissenter from established religious dogma, from the established religion of the land, established from Christianity, or from whatever the acceptable established religion is. The so-called, the so-called, what do they call them? Cult watch networks that they have out there. These cult watch networks. Their whole basis is, well, if it doesn't fall within traditional Christianity, it's a cult, it's evil, and it's dangerous. This is the same thing here that is shown, because because that's the same thing. I mean, it's a heretic is a dissenter from established religious dogma, or one who dissents from accepted belief or doctrine. Up there in one says, especially a baptized member of the Roman Church who disavows a revealed truth. So anyone, and this actually covers anyone who is baptized or not in the Catholic Church, who comes against what the Pope says, that person is a heretic. It's the same thing. That's the same thing, men, that fueled the Crusades. That's the same thing that fueled the Inquisitions. Anyone that went against the established religion. If you violated the traditions that religious leader had set up, then it was a death penalty offense. And people were persecuted. They were, they were tortured. They were killed. They tried, they tried to exact confessions and tried to get people to recant what their beliefs, and it was, this was the system. And they did this publicly. They did this in a public manner to show anyone else who would follow the scriptures. This is waiting for you if you continue to if you continue to go against the established religion. And it was on those who were on those who didn't truly believe, on those who didn't put their full trust in Yahweh. It had a very negative effect, because they would crumble. They had no backbone. It was just like when Pastor was arrested, there were people that fled. They took off. They fled because they were afraid that they were going to get caught up and that they were going to be arrested. For what? For standing for righteousness? Pastor stood in his place. and everyone else who stood in their place, how many of those saw prison? How many of those were arrested? Yahweh's in complete control. And if he allows us to be taken into prison, or if he allows us to be taken captive, then guess what, man? There's a work for us to do wherever that we're going to be taken. And we have to look at it that way. You know, there's a great Kahan right now that is not here with us. And the reason he's not here is because Yahweh has a work for him to do where he is. And when his work is done there, he's going to go somewhere else. And when it's done somewhere else, he's going to go somewhere else. And when that work's done, he's coming home. Because Yahweh is in complete control. But to prosecute, it's so close. Persecution is so close to prosecution. You know, they played with the letters a little bit, but it still means the same thing. To prosecute means to follow to the end, to pursue until finished. And this is what they do. The prosecutor will pursue somebody. They will go after them, regardless of whether the evidence rules this person is guilty or not. Their job is to pursue an end, which is to get a conviction. That is what they pursue. To engage in or to perform, to bring a legal action for redress or punishment of a crime or violation of law. Remember the many laws that Daniel saw that were created. And we're going to see here when we get into, in a little bit here, this so-called peace computer, as we get into it, how this is going to work. You know, and Pastor, he sees how this persecution now can come against, you know, this widespread thing now can come against the believers. But look at the origin of or etymology of pursue comes from the Latin. Modern English from Latin prosecutus, which means to pursue, and then that definition of pursue means to follow in order to overtake, to capture, kill, or defeat. Go back and look at what Shaul's job was back as he described back there in Acts. You know, he pursued men, women, and children and captured and brought them into prison. He pursued them to find or employ measures to obtain or accomplish, to pursue a goal, to proceed, to engage or follow up or proceed with an argument, to continue. Notice what pursuing means: to continue to afflict. To continue to afflict, and this is, this is part of what this is, what is in store. The legal definition of prosecute means to institute and carry forward legal action against for redress or especially for punishment of a crime. To institute and carry on a lawsuit with reference to an action. But that's again what they do, and in Acts chapter 6, you see a little bit more. You see a little bit more here about Shaul and about Shaul's, well, not necessarily specifically about Shaul, but more about this system. It says, now for some of those who belong to the synagogue called the Freedmen's Synagogue, and they rose up and disputed with Stephen, but they were unable to stand up against the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. It's just like the religions of the world. They cannot stand up. They cannot speak. They cannot compete with the Scriptures. They cannot argue scriptural points with Pastor. There's no way. They can't do it because they don't have a scriptural leg to stand on. Okay? They get into a scriptural argument with Pastor or a scriptural discussion, they are going to lose. And they know it. So what do? They attack the character. They make things up. They bring up things, and they will attack a person's character. So they secretly, notice what they did here. So they secretly instigated men to say, we have heard this man speak blasphemous words against Moshe and the Mighty One. What do the followays do when they leave? They go to the prosecutors. They go to the attorneys. They go to whoever. They go to the news media. And what do? They instigate. They say, we have heard this man speak these things and practice these things and secretly tell others to do these things. Blasphemous words. And in this way, what do? They stir up the people. And we see the evidence of that every time they have these articles they show in the newspaper. You can see the bias. Every time that they show a certain newscaster on one of the news stations, you can see the arrogance in this man when he speaks, and it's just like with disgust that he speaks of the house of Yahweh. But this is what they do. They do that. They use that position not to find the truth as they're supposed to do, but to stir the people up, against Yahweh and against Yahweh's laws, to build a hatred for the laws of Yahweh. And they don't realize that what they're doing is building up a hatred for the way to peace, the way to joy, the way to solve the problems. They're trying to drive that wedge. They're doing the work of Satan the adversary. But in this way, they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, so they came upon him and arrested him. They took him before the council. They took Stephen before the council, and they also brought forward false witnesses who said, this man does not cease speaking blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. Well, that's not what he was standing up and speaking against. He was upholding the laws and the prophets. He was speaking out against their traditions that they try to pass off as law. The same thing that pastor speaks against today. And then in Acts chapter 7, it goes through, and it covers all of the arguments, and it covers Stephen's his address, and at the very end it shows that his words stirred the people up so much to anger that they rose up and they murdered him. But look here in Acts chapter 8 here. Look, and Shaul was part of this persecution, but later it was turned around. Yahweh called Shaul into the work of Yahweh, and he repented of all of these things, and he became a very strong individual in the work of Yahweh, which goes to show us, Pastor has brought out many times before, that Yahweh can bring anybody into his work that he wants to. Showing again, he's in complete control. But it shows here, Shaul persecutes the called out ones, and Shaul gave his approval to the murder of Stephen. Shaul was part of this. He was part of this prosecuting attorney. Now, on that day, there began a great persecution against the called out ones. But look in verse 3 now. But Shaul ravaged the called out ones, persecuting the house of Yahweh, entering in and dragging away both men and women, and throwing them into prison. This was part of this system that existed then. And the reason that I bring it up today is it's the exact same system today. The Roman soldiers, the soldiers that went out and enforcing this, Pastor has shown out that on the chest of a police officer, deputy sheriff, any type of law enforcement officer, there is a badge which is a replica of the Roman shield. It's unmistakable. It's there. And their job is the same, to enforce those laws. And when laws are passed that says that you are not to use the name of Yahweh, or if you're of the house of Yahweh, you're considered to be part of a terroristic group and you're going to be arrested. And for some reason, somebody gets stopped and the question comes up, are you of the house of Yahweh? Yes or no? I mean, that's going to be our individual test. How are we going to answer that? Remember what Pastor told us. He says, if we deny Yahweh, if we deny Yahshua, then we are going to be denied as well. And Pastor warns us of these things. He says, we're going to be faced with these things. If we have jobs out in the world, it could very well come to pass that we're going to be called into your supervisor's office and say, you part of the house of Yahweh? Then we have no need for you here any longer. If that takes place, praise Yahweh, because then Yahweh has a job for us to do here. But continuing on here, the remainder, we see here the bottom line is in Revelation 22:14, tells us, "Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, may enter in through the gates into the city." That's the only way for eternal life, and that's only taught here at Yahweh's house. It's not taught anywhere else. Now, all the believers who are the saints of Yahweh, who keep Yahweh's laws, will refuse to accept this mark of this beastly system that Satan has placed upon all men. Those believers will qualify for the kingdom of Yahweh and receive the blessings and privileges of the government of Yahweh forever. For many years, I've looked to see how this martyrdom of the saints could possibly take place in a land such as the United States of America. I know that there are small persecutions of those who follow Yahweh's laws in school systems and city governments. Little pockets here and there. We've all faced it out in the world. We've all come face to face with it. We've all come face to face when we were looking for work. Well, I can't work on the Sabbath. From Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, I'm unavailable for work because it's Yahweh's Sabbath. Well, you need to work on that day, otherwise you don't have a job. Is that Sabbath really that important for you? Don't your children need to eat? Don't you have a wife and family? Don't you have a baby on the way? You need this job. Surely Yahweh will understand. Tickling the ears, trying to do the same thing that Satan did with her lying, deceitful words. And the reason they bring that out is because that's what they've been taught by their fathers. The lying religions of the world have said, well, it doesn't matter what you do because you have this license to sin. You see, it goes back to this licentiousness, that license to sin. You can do whatever you want to without consequences, and you're going to be rewarded for it anyway. But Pastor shows here, he says that, and at times there have been killings, but never on an all-out open scale. Our public laws and U.S. Constitution are against such atrocities at the present time. The persecution that does befall now is slightly hidden and underhanded, but prophecy shows it will not remain that way. So I watch the news media for clues which indicate the changes to take place. For years, the House of Yahweh has warned everyone to watch for a restoration of power in the Roman Catholic Church, which will head up this slaughter, and to watch her daughters, the Protestant churches, which will give their power to this beastly system. Only recently have we seen this prophecy take shape, and it's beginning. It's more and more. It's not an instantaneous, and we have a tendency to look for things like that, it's either fulfilled or not, yes or no. But some of these things can be a process. Some of these things can be a process, and an example of that is if you commit sin, you will die. Some sins will cause instantaneous death. And you can bet that this is what Satan used in part of her deception with Eve. Has Yahweh indeed said that you're going to die? Look, I've been doing this for years, and do I look like I'm dead to you? I'm still here. Not realizing and knowing full well that Eve couldn't see what was taking place on a cellular level, on a microscopic level, of how the death process had begun. When someone dies of cancer, it's not an instantaneous boom, they're gone. But it's a process. And as the disease advances, more and more symptoms show, and the body begins to get run down. Well, that's how that process takes place. So, it can be the same thing with some of the fulfillment of some of these prophecies. It's not necessarily an instantaneous thing, but it can take place over a time period. So I watched the news media for clues to indicate these changes that would take place. And to start the restoration of the Catholic power started with the Pope's campaign for publicity. At this time, he has been in the news almost daily, trying to organize and combine all the world's religions. Look at what Constantine did. That's what Pope Constantine did. He tried to unite everybody under one God. Well, this is the same thing that's taking place. Look at the recent meeting that took place with the meeting on the global warming. Watch that and see how that's going to play out. But the prophecy shows more. Prophecy shows that the religious powers will once again rule the political systems of the whole world. Now I see the vehicle in which the religion and politics can again rule and develop as prophecy shows. And Pastor shows something here about the peace computer. He says the idea of using computers for peace started in 1978 with Dr. Henry Heimlich. And this is the same developer of the Heimlich method of dislodging obstructions in the throat. Dr. Heimlich says computers could make the world breathe easier. In a Computers for Peace proposal, he asked then President Jimmy Carter and the current leaders of Egypt and Israel to consider a proposal at a September 5th, 1978 meeting where they were scheduled to convene. The Associated Press reported this on August 29th. Isn't there an event that took place around that time period? August 29th, somewhere around 1934, August 28th. Praise Yahweh, exactly. But this peace computer, look, it was reported on this one day earlier, or it was reported on August 29th, which means they wrote it when? They wrote it up the day earlier, right? Okay. Dr. Heimlich suggested that the computers could analyze resources and demonstrate the advantages of cooperation among nations. He said this method is surely more positive than the present traditional attempts at arms control by regulating the number of warheads and missiles. It says Dr. Heimlich envisioned using computers to supply the world's needs. Recently, the Computers for Peace has come into a totally different means of bringing peace to the world. And this is part of their article. This is what their belief is. It says Brother Austin David Carroll, a member of the Christian Brothers Roman Catholic Order, made known in a presentation on June 4th, 1982, a plan of computerized peacemaking. Carroll holds a doctorate in computer science from New York University. Notice where he went to school. In New York. Okay. That Babylon, that second Babylon. He is also director of data processing for the New York Archdiocese. Notice who he's working for. He's working for the Catholic Church. This fully outlined plan was presented to the Pope by letter. The Pope approved this plan, which means this plan will advance the wealth of the Catholic Church. Of course it will. It's going to be to their benefit. It's being headed up by the Roman Catholic Church under the direction of somebody who has close ties, who is a very close, has close ties of the Catholic Church, as a member of the Catholic Church. Do you think anybody is going to benefit out of this other than the Catholic Church? As pastor would say, that's probably allowing the fox to watch the hen house. But it says the peace computer is located in Spring Lake, New Jersey. The directors of this Mansion Center are Sirius Vance, former secretary under Jimmy Carter, Kurt Waldheim, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Peter Grace, advisor to Ronald Reagan, and Claire Booth Lucy. It says the computer will be programmed from the minds of top officials of many different countries. So again, they're going to be programmed using the minds of the smartest people that they know. Russia is included, for Brother Carroll has already met with Russian officials at Cambridge, England. He has also met with 28 other countries to discuss the system for peace. These officials' minds will be picked at Spring Lake in a process known as the Delphi technique. These officials are the elite in the study of war and peace from their perspective, from their respective countries, and it's from their perspective, from what their thoughts are. But this Delphi technique, this Delphi method, I looked it up, and the Delphi method, the authors of the method, it says they weren't, and you can see the word there, they weren't pleased with this name because it implies something oracular, something smacking a little of the occult. It says the Delphi method is based on the assumption that group judgments are more valid than individual judgments. In other words, they're talking about democracy. They're talking about If you want a true democracy, I mean, is really kind of like mob rule. The majority rules. It sounds like a mob situation to me. Okay, but they didn't like the name Delphi because it has ties in with the occult or something, because it implies something oracular. And this Delphi, where it comes from, is it's famous as the ancient sanctuary that grew rich as the seat of the oracle that was consulted on important decisions throughout the ancient classical world. So you can see it was this mystical thing that they consulted. And there's many different types of this augury, as we read about in the booklet on Halloween, different methods of fortune telling and things like that. And this is the same type of thing that was going on here. But this oracle was consulted on important decisions throughout the ancient classical world. Moreover, it was considered as the navel or the center of the world by the Greeks, as represented by whatever that word is there, omphalos. But this is that city, or this is that Delphi, and it basically it was at the house of a god that was consulted. And there's key characteristics. There's some key characteristics of this Delphi technique, and one of those characteristics is anonymity of the participants. Okay, in other words, they don't know who the people aren't going to know who the participants are. And it says usually here all participants remain anonymous. Their identity is not revealed even after the completion of the final report. This prevents the authority, personality, or reputation of some participants from dominating others in the process. This is what they say. Arguably, it also frees participants to some extent from their personal biases, opinions, and minimizes the bandwagon effect, or following the crowd and doing evil, right? Or the halo effect, and allows free expression of opinions, encourages open critique, and facilitates admission of errors when revising earlier judgments. Okay? So what they say is they're trying to point out, well, this technique is beneficial because it's anonymous. You don't know who the participants are. But look who it's being headed by. Look who's in charge of it. Look who it's headed by. Who do you think is going to be placed into this decision-making process? Think Yisrayl Hawkins is going to be part of that decision-making process? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. Very, very seriously, I doubt it. But it's going to be whoever is going to support that agenda, whoever is going to support whatever it is that they want to push forth here. And it shows here, it says, these officials are the elite in the study of war and peace from their respective countries. Alexander Haig, a former Secretary of Defense who will represent the United States, is one of the first officials on the agenda. Haig is a Catholic. He also has a brother who is a Jesuit priest and head of the Jesuit University. So what influences do you think are going to be placed in the programming of this peace computer? The mechanics of the peace computer here. It says the computer will work off a new satellite channel paid for by the Roman Catholic Church. Look who's who's bankrolling this thing. Each country participating will consult this computer when problems arise. Then the computer will work out, it says, peaceful solutions. Not likely. Each side will then either comply or suffer the consequences from all other participating countries. So they're going to put the problem into the peace computer, and the peace computer is going to say, whatever. You've rejected Mary. You need to accept Mary's teachings. You need to consult Mary with this. Okay? The consequences will be determined by a third party to resolve conflicts. Brother Carroll is hoping that the Roman Catholic Church will be that third party. So you've got the Roman Catholic Church that is actually setting up the system, and then as a third party, a disinterested or somebody that does not have any interest in the system, is going to be set up to help resolve the conflicts. That sure sounds like what Pastor talked about again, about the fox watching the hen house. He said the Roman Catholic Church would be especially suited to administer the computer as an impartial third party. Moral persuasion would be brought by the leaders of large religions or by the Pope to any nation which fails to comply with the computer's directives. You know, the Catholic Church, you know, the Pope, they don't teach morals. They reject morals. They reject the laws of Yahweh, and it's the laws of Yahweh that guide morals. Remember, that's Yahweh's righteous character. Carroll said no nation would refuse the Pope's commands. And he said here, he also said that the Catholic Cardinal to the United States is the military vicar to the United States, meaning he has authority over all Catholic chaplains. Carroll said the majority of West Point cadets are Catholics. Most of the top military leaders in the United States and other Western nations are Catholic and would do what the Church commands. The Vatican is a unique institution, for it is both church and state, and it is very much an international power. Now, remember what took place with this agreement on climate change. You know, weren't there certain parties that weren't there nations that were giving their authority and their power over to the Church, over to the Pope? It's very much an international. The Vatican is very much an international power. Besides being head, and at this time it was of the world 750 million Catholics, the Pope is also the sovereign of a legally constituted country known as Vatican City. From there, the Pope sends and receives ambassadors, just like any other leader of any country. The Pope exchanges ambassadors called apostolic nuncios with some 90 countries. He has also assigned Vatican diplomats to the United Nations and the European Economic Community. The Vatican is one of the best informed centers in international affairs of the world. You know, they have got. Pastor has pointed out that they have the best intelligence intelligence system in the world, because they have people at all levels. You know, they have intelligence gatherers at every level, in parishes, you know, in every neighborhood, and that report all the way up. So it's a very effective intelligence network. The Vatican is once again, shows here, using its political powers as means of promoting peace. Like it or not, prophecies show the Vatican will become a major power in international politics. And we've seen this come to pass. Remember when this was written? This was written back in the late 70s. Just look at now at just how much more of a major power that the Vatican has become. It says the Center for Computer Peace is located, and there's the address there, in Ocean Avenue in Spring Lake, New Jersey, but it is under control. But it is under the New York Archdiocese, meaning it is under the control of the Archbishop of New York. And then Pastor, you know, he shows here. He says earlier in chapter 8 that we saw we saw how that number 666 could identify Nimrod, but it also identifies this Nimrod system, this beastly system. And you can see the gematria there. The gematria for this peace computer is controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. And you see the word computer there, and look what it adds up to. Adds up to 666. Only Yahweh's government and Yahweh's laws can bring peace to this world. Only Yahweh can save this world from the destruction that is to take place in the next few years. Man's efforts without the blessing of Yahweh will only bring more destruction and mankind, and that's all that has been brought. Their efforts and everything that they've done, they're trusting in their own hearts and doing the things that in their own minds, you know, trusting in their own hearts. You know, he who trusts in his own heart is a fool, and their heart is desperately wicked. And the result of this we see here in Matthew 24 is going to show this great tribulation. And in verse 22 there it says, and except lest those days were shortened, there would no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days would be shortened. And again, in Daniel 12:17, we see this time of trouble. It's going to be like nothing ever experienced. Now, just closing out here, it shows here, Pastor writes here, he says, computers are programmed by man. Computers are very stupid machines. Okay? They're very stupid. Because computers are programmed by men, and no matter how much programming is done, the knowledge of the computer is still no greater than the minds of the man used to program it. A computer can only do what it's been told to do. And if these minds were unable to bring peace to the world when there were no computers, then these same minds in which program the computer can never program peace. It's impossible. It won't work. To the believers of Yahweh who keep His laws, and it shows here that the believers of Yahweh who keep the laws, let's go back up here. It says, the trouble spoken of by Yahshua Messiah and Daniel will start when the program instructions given by the computer, programmed by a man, is enforced by the churches and governments. When the computer solution is that all the world must worship must be of one mind, meaning all the world must worship as the computer instructs, and as the governments try to enforce that worship, those who refuse to do this will suffer. The believers of Yahweh who do keep His laws will be blamed for causing unrest, discord, and trouble. And for this they will be slaughtered, and their deaths will be called for. So, we can see here, and you can see here in that final admonition there that's given by Daniel, and through his policy and deceit shall increase with his hand, he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. So I went just a hair over, but we'll start here on the beginning of chapter 10, the temple and the two witnesses, next week. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you.